Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of our podcast, Is Breakfast Included? Today on the show, I had the pleasure of sitting down with my friend Greg Howard. Greg is a guitar tech based out of Raleigh, North Carolina. He tells us a little bit about when he got started and a few of the bands he worked for. We talk about his current gig, which is Brad Whitford's guitar tech. He's been Brad's tech for a little over 20 years. And he's also the co-owner of Monkeys Solderless. They make these really cool cables, power cables and patch cables for pedal boards. We get into that. Tells a few stories. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed spending time with him. We spent the whole day together, and then we sat down and did this podcast. Let's check it out. You ready?
Yeah.
All right. Tell everyone who you are.
I'm Greg Howard, and I've been a roadie for 25 plus years.
A roadie. Normally it's
tech.
like, I'm a guitar tech.
Yeah. No, I'm
I
a
like the
friggin'
word.
roadie.
Yeah, we're roadies. All right. What year did you start, and what band did you start with?
So I started in kind of like part-time in like the early 90s. I worked a little bit for Cry of Love and a band called DAG, and that was all local, Raleigh, North Carolina. They were both Raleigh bands that were on, eventually on Columbia. But I started like in earnest in like 96, and it was kind of late. I was in my 30s. But I'd always worked in like music stores and record stores. And so I was always, and played in bands. And so I knew a lot of musicians, hung around with a lot of musicians, went to a lot of shows. So, but like 96, I did some one-offs with DAG, in the summer. And then I guess it was the fall of 96. So my neighbor was a tour manager. He tour managed Cry of Love and the Squirrel Nut Zippers and a few other people. His name's Bob Davis.
Yeah.
Became a tour accountant before he retired. Worked with a lot of big bands. But anyway, so he's like my next door neighbor. So one day he's like knocks on my door, pre-cell phone. And he's like, "Hey man, you want to work for King's X?" And I was like, "Oh man, I love those guys," and he's like, "Here," and he hands me his phone cord, which is like 100 feet long, like landline cord
From his house,
across to my apartment. And I'm like, "Hello," and it was their production manager, who was also their lighting guy, this guy Garrett Rentz, and he's like, "Yeah, man, I need you to come out and tech for Ty." I'm like, "Okay." He's like, we'll send you a plane ticket and pay you like $500 a week or whatever it was." And I was like, "Okay." I was working in a printing place, so. That was my first tour. It was a bus tour.
What year was that again?
1996. So it was fall of 96. And it was on a 40-foot Eagle with us and the band, the Galactic Cowboys, was our opener. So it was us. So it was band, crew, and opening band, all on a 12 dudes on a 40-foot Eagle.
So that was after their Atlantic debut. That was the Dogman.
Yeah, so this was Ear Candy.
Oh, okay.
So they were managed by, at the time, King's X was managed by Rush's manager, who's also Van Halen's manager. And the day we left, so we went and did rehearsals in Houston, and the day we left for the tour, Atlantic dropped them. And so they're like, they're on our tour support. So, we went out for, I don't know, a month, 6 weeks, maybe less even. But yeah, that's how I got started. I built this kind of stupid large work box, and I'd never really flown hardly at all. So like I tried to like carry on this big work box, and they were like, "Hey man, you got to check that, man. You can't, try to take it through security, pre 9/11 and shit." It was pretty funny. But yeah, so I worked for them, and then came back home, and like a couple of weeks later, Garrett, the guy from King's X, called me, and he was out on Manson. He was lighting and did a little bit of production for Manson, and he's like, "Hey, our opening band, this band called New York Loose that was on Hollywood Records. He's like, "Hey, our opening band needs a tech. I need come I need you to fly out like tomorrow." So I was like, okay." So went out, another bus tour, and as they say, the rest is history. Like later on, so that was all 96, 97. I went back to work for Cry of Love on their second record, and that was a van and a truck tour. So we had like a box truck, me and the front of house guy. were like the only two like crew guys. And then Bob Davis was the tour manager. He drove the band around in the van, and then we followed them in the box truck with all the gear.
That second album with Cry Love, that was not with the original singer.
So that was with Robert Mason, who sang for Lynch Mob, and he's now the singer for Warrant. Has been for probably 10 years now. Hell, it may be more than that. Great singer, great dude, great singer, great guitar player.
I had another question, and you jogged my memory, but I got started late in this business. I was in my 30s, and like you said, like it just happens. And I was very fortunate. I started on a bus too.
Right.
Once you're on a bus and then you go to a van, that to me is refreshing. Sometimes when I go to a van, and it's the opposite. If you started in a van, you go to a bus, and then you go back to a van, you're just hating it.
Yeah.
Have you always been on bus tours?
No. So after that 90, that Cry Love in 97, same thing with them. Like the record company wasn't really backing them, and eventually they just called it quits.
Yeah.
And I went back home, and I was working this like printing job. I was like typesetting business cards, and my boss was like super cool. He was like, just come in and work. I would work I could work 4 hours a day if I wanted to. I'd just go in, and it was like mind numbing because it's just basically just no design. It's just, you're just putting words on a computer page, to make these business cards and adding clip art or something. But he would let me work as much as I wanted in. And whenever I went out on tour, he's like, yeah, man, just call me when you get back in town. So that's what I do, on time, when I was time at home. And I got a call from front of house guy who worked with Dag, Reggie Griffin, and he asked me to go work for Chris Whitley. And again, I was like a pretty good, pretty big fan of Chris's. He was on Sony Work, So, but that was a van tour. That was a bunch of dudes in a van with a trailer behind. Band and crew. But it was cool, and I didn't mind that. And then after that, I went back to Dag in 98, and I was the tour manager on Dag and backline guy. So I did bass and guitar. Our monitor guy would set up the keys, and our front house guy would set up the drums. And then I would tech the show. Like, so if I would tech the drummer during the show if the monitor guy was too busy. And that was another van tour. And then they got kind of dropped, and I was at a club one night and got a phone call from Andy Gould management, who I knew from New York Loose, and they're like, "Hey, we need somebody to tour manage, Monster Magnet, just for like a week until the guy we hired can come out." And I'm like, "Okay," So I go out on that, and I'm there, and their guitar tech wasn't working out. So they were like, "Man, we got to find a guitar tech." And I was like over there, like raising my hand, like, exactly. Actually, that's what I do. I'm not really a tour manager. I'm like, I knew how to use the computer and,
settle
and make all that, do all that shit. But, the new tour manager came in, this guy, Brad Divins, who, used to front a band called Wrathchild America, and also Souls at Zero, who I knew him from Souls at Zero, but my band opened for them.
Yeah. I know Brad.
And then he became a lifelong friend, really close friend, and we did a lot of tours together. But yeah, it's just stated with Monster Magnet is the guitar tech, and then we were, it was a bus tour. We were out and eventually out opening for Manson again. Yeah. So I would literally worked for the opener on Manson for 4 tours, 4 separate tours. And then back when I worked for New York Loose in 96, I showed up at the gig and stage left. None of the shit was set up in Tampa at Janus Landing. And I walked in the production office, and there's my buddy Garrett's in there. He goes, "Hey, jackass, go out there and set that shit up." The guitar tech, his appendix had burst. And so I teched both bands for a week, including a big arena show in Miami.
Wow.
And I had to do keys and guitars.
Yeah.
And the keyboard player just liked to break shit. He would just break a keyboard across his knee and just look at you "Hey, give me another one, serve it up." So I'm like, all right, whatever.
So King's X, Dag, Cry love. At one point, did bands quit hiring you because they'd get dropped as soon as you?
Well, that was the thing. I'd get a phone call, and I started asking like, "What label are you on?" Because same thing with Chris Whitley, he got dropped.
Yeah.
And I was like, "What label are you on?" I'm like, "If you're on a CBS label, if you're on Columbia or Sony Work, if you're on a Sony label," I'm like, "You may not want to hire me. I think I'm a bad luck charm, you know." But yeah, it was kind of like that.
Yeah.
It was pretty funny. But I worked for a bunch of bands. I worked for Remy Zero. I worked for the Verve Pipe in the 90s. I worked for Machine Head. I worked for Sister Hazel. Ended up working for Hootie and the Blowfish, which were guys I had known since my 20s. You know,
because they're from that area, right?
Yeah, well, they're from South Carolina, and I'm from Raleigh, North Carolina. Yeah. And we played the same circuit. We played all the same frats and with my band, and we would open for them where they were popular and the clubs they were popular at. Like we'd go down to Columbia, South Carolina. We'd sleep on their floor. I used to sleep on Darius and Dean's floor. And then we got them into clubs that didn't like pop bands. We were kind of like we were kind of power pop, REM-ish, Pursuit of Happiness, that kind of thing. But I remember this one famous club, the Cat's Cradle in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. They hated, Frank, the guy that owns it, still owns it, hated pop bands. So he would never book Hootie. And excuse me. He would so Hootie opened for us at the Cat's Cradle, even though they were kind of bigger than us. But I can always say, Hootie and the Blowfish opened for my band, whatever. But I ended up teching for them off and on. For a few years, just different. I'd tech for Darius and Dean, or I'd tech for Mark.
Yeah.
And they're friends today. And I ended up teching Darius's country thing.
Yeah.
So
isn't that crazy? Like,
yeah.
I started in the country world right before he started his country career. I had started in the country world, and I heard a rumor that he turned in his country album, and the label was like, "That's too country."
Right.
So he had to.
Right. Well, he did a soul record while he was still in Hootie was still going on, or they maybe had taken a break or something, and it was actually really good.
Yeah. No, I'd seen him. Some friends of mine were opening for him in Connecticut, and I went to see them, and I watched the show, and I just couldn't believe, like, the guy that used to front Hootie and the Blowfish had a arena of country fans just singing.
Well, so when I was out with Hootie, we had a night off in Greenville, South Carolina, and like at the hotel we were staying at, he fronted the Frank Sinatra Orchestra one night because he had literally played Frank's like 80th birthday or something, and he was Frank's favorite of all the people that came and like played and celebrated Frank's birthday. Well, he fronted the Frank Sinatra Orchestra. He's doing all this crooner stuff, and it was amazing. And I just went up to him afterwards. I'm like, what the hell? And he just looked at me and he just shrugged his shoulders. I mean, that guy's so musical and is into everything.
Yeah, he's super talented, super humble,
super talented. And then, and it's funny, I remember out teching on his country thing, and he came to sound check one day. And I remember the keyboard player asked something like, he's like, "Hey, Darius, how long have you and Greg known each other?" And he looked at me, and I just kind of mouthed, like 25 years or something. And he was like, "What? Son of a bitch."
What was the first like big gig you landed in, like that you're like people that, like I say, posters on the wall.
Right. Well, it's funny. I worked for Linkin Park on their first tour, and we did, it was almost all festivals. Started on Ozfest, and then ended up on Family Values, and then ended up on their own thing, the Project Revolution, headlining arenas and stuff, and I kind of retired. It was like 2001, 2002. I kind of retired, and I got a phone call one day from Jimmy Archie, my Gibson guitar rep, and he goes, "Hey, man," he goes, "my buddy from Aerosmith's going to call you, and ask you to tech for Brad Whitford. I think you should do it." And I'm like, really? And he's like, "Yeah." So Jim Service, who was Joe Perry's guy and also the Aerosmith's, long time, like year-round guy, did all the studio stuff, since the 90s, calls me and was like, and I had sold him a pedal board, like, because I had a pedal board company at the time, and I sold him a pedal board like a month before or something. He goes, "Oh, here you guitar tech." And I go, "Yeah, I told you that when we talked before, but you fucking forgot, But he's like, "Yeah, and I was like, he's like, "Yeah, we need somebody for Brad." And I was like, "Man, I'm kind of retired, so I turned it down. And then, so I called my wife at work, and she's like, "What? Can you call him back?" And I go, "What do you mean?" She goes, "You should do that." And I'm like, "All right." So I called him back, and I'm like, "Hey man, I kind of changed my mind." He's, "Well, we haven't found anybody." And, you come highly recommended from Jimmy from Gibson. So, I started, working for Brad in July of 2002.
Wow.
So that was, to me, that was like the big band,
Yeah.
And, here 20 years later, I'm still working for Brad. I've come and gone. I've left and done, other bands. I've done Green Day.
Yeah.
I did AC/DC.
I can't remember where you and I met. If I met you at AC/DC or if I met you when you were with Steely Dan.
So what I remember is Steely Dan. So if you remember, we did Robert Downey Jr.'s 50th birthday in Burbank in an airplane hangar. And Duran was on it, and Steely. Was there another band?
I don't remember.
There was another band, but that's where I remember meeting you. And that Steely Dan gig was, that was another like dream gig for me. I took care of John Harrington, the guitar player, and Freddie Washington, the bass player. And Freddie just gave him his 4-string at the beginning of the show, and then he might play a 5-string, and John was the music director, and I couldn't even do guitar changes with him because it was so fast.
Yeah.
So I just tuned his guitars and put them out. So like super easy gig. And I basically helped my buddy Dave Rule, who worked for Walter, because Walter would have like 50 guitars out, and then you just put them out on stands on the stage, and Walter would like in the middle of a song look around and like point to one, and he'd just kind of wave his hand at you, and in the middle of the song he would change guitars. He was a nut. I love the guy, but he was a nut.
Yeah, that's like my gig, man. Like I hand my guy a bass, and I just update my social media.
Right. And that
every now and then he'll want the 5-string, but it's pretty much he's a creature of habit.
Right. Yeah. And I worked for John Oates. I worked for Hall & Oates in 2006, and John was the same way. It's like you put a electric out and an acoustic, and he even had an acoustic pickup on his Strat. So if he didn't have time to change, because Daryl would go about maybe 3 songs into the set before he'd just start calling stuff out. He'd go completely off the set list. Mm-hmm. And so the only guitar change I had was if they did Family Man, which was drop D.
Yeah.
So and it was just me on stage left. And like, I swear I think I fell asleep during one of the shows, because not that it was boring. They were a great band, but it was just like, I had nothing to do,
No.
And then like with Whitford right now, these last few Vegas residencies we've done, he just plays one Les Paul all night unless we do a different tuning.
Yeah.
Do drop D or something, or open G on something, and then we'll switch guitars.
And that kind of set, I think, can be a blessing or a curse.
Right.
Because I've you and I have worked together, and I've noticed you, like me, like I'm always on alert, whether he's playing the same bass through the whole thing. But then there's that one night where you just walk in like, oh, I'm not going to have to do anything.
Yeah.
And that's the night they want,
right.
you to tap dance.
Right.
Pretty much.
Exactly.
What was it like working for AC/DC?
Really cool.
You looked after Stevie, right?
So I worked for Stevie. What happened was my buddy Trace Foster was out working for Stevie, and they were pretty far into the Rocker Bus tour in 2016, and they were in Australia, and everything went pear-shaped with Angus's guy, and I literally got a phone call at 3:00 in the morning from Trace, and he's like, send me your resume right now. The band wants to look at it on the plane. And I was like, okay. I got up and shot him my resume. And I knew the production manager, Opie, from Ozfest, and he called me a couple of days later and was like, hey, He goes, I'm going to hire you, but he goes, I can't. I don't know that you might be teching for Angus. You might be teching for Stevie. He's like, I don't know. He goes, these guys are really nice guys, but he's like, they like familiarity, So what happened was, because Trace had been there already and Angus knew him, Trace moved over to Angus and I took over for Stevie. So it was like, what do you want, the easy guy or the easier guy? Because both of them, like Stevie played one guitar.
Yeah, yeah.
And the only time he switched guitars, we changed guitars if he was out of tune or if Angus thought he was out of tune. And then it was, the spare for one song, and I'd get the main one back in tune and go right back to it.
Yeah.
So, and that was a great tour, big tour.
Yeah.
And I was there with Brian, and then I was there when Brian wasn't there, and we started auditioning all these, singers.
Yeah.
And ended up with Axl Rose, which was not the best guy we auditioned. He's a great dude, and he was the right guy for the gig, because we were doing stadiums in Europe.
Yeah.
And those European audiences are, pretty brutal, especially AC/DC audiences. They want their band,
Yeah.
And you had to be able to control 80,000 people, which he can do, which some of the other guys we auditioned would have probably struggled with.
Yeah.
Some guys were unknown. Some guys were also known, but not at that level.
Yeah.
And
I know a guy from Dallas auditioned for you guys.
He did. And he was good too.
Yeah.
He was good. Everybody we auditioned was good. One of them was a 20-something-year-old kid from Raleigh that was in an AC/DC tribute band. And he really sounded like Brian. He had struggled a little bit with the Bond stuff, but he really sounded like Brian. But he was shaking like a leaf. He was the first guy we auditioned. He came in, and he's like, and so the crew, like, we kind of jammed a couple of songs with him, before, so he could get his monitors right, and he was just like freaking out. And then, and then the band comes in, and Angus is like, oi, what you want to play? Because we'll play anything. And they let all those guys determine whatever they auditioned on. Yeah.
Oh man. I'd heard some stories about the auditions, but like I said, what you hear and what really happened.
Yeah.
I
thought we auditioned Nick Chester from Jet.
Oh,
Australian band, who I had known. So I worked for Green Day for 5 years, and when we toured Australia, Jet was our opener. And so I knew him from that, and I was also a fan of that band. And so it was fun seeing him, and he was probably the best singer. But he really... I don't think he wanted the gig. Like, he came in from his honeymoon to do the audition, So his wife was pissed, and but he's like, "How can I not?"
Right?
And he had just I think he had just recorded like an R&B record or something, and moved to Italy, or he was kind of sort of out of the business for a while, and then he was just coming back in. But he was great.
Yeah. Well, man, I like I said, I came into this business late, like you, but you and I had crossed paths through the years. One thing, when I got the Aerosmith gig, when I was called to come fill in for Aerosmith, one thing I knew about it was I was going to learn shit, because you, unlike a lot of techs out there, are always open to like, hey, I'll show you whatever I know. Or if there's an easier way. Is that just in your nature to teach people when they ask you, or to not look down on them and go like, you dumbass, what do you mean you can't do that?
Yeah. No, I like learning stuff, and I like teaching stuff.
Yeah.
I try to learn from everybody that I work with, like the other techs. You see somebody like stringing a guitar, and you're like, why are you doing it that way?
Yeah.
I remember when I worked for the Verve Pipe, AJ Dunning, the guitar player, and I basically did an experiment where we strang his guitars as many different ways as like you could, with the knot and the wrap and the
over under
and all this. And we figured out that the over under, one wrap up, one wrap down on the wound strings, and then one wrap up and multiple wraps down on the plain strings, made it easier to change strings, especially if you broke a string. And it stayed just as in tune as doing the like wraparound knot thing, which I hate because I always like end up breaking it. And especially like the high E string, I like poke my finger and end up bleeding all over the guitar.
And you have to change the string fast. You're like, it's like, like you're untying your shoe, but you get a knot in it. And then you're,
But I learn stuff all the time. And unfortunately, like sometimes I don't even remember who I learned it from.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just like to,
I know we had a guy when I was with you guys on Aerosmith, Brandon Jones.
Yeah.
Who we were always around his work box. Like, he taught me numerous things on that I still use.
He's a full on luthier, and so it's like you can learn, especially I always say, I think Jim Service told me this. He was like, we're just medics. We're at the MASH unit. We're not doctors. He's like, we're out in the field. He goes, we're just here to. He's like, I'm not a surgeon. Which I would consider like a luthier. I mean, I know guys that'll cut a nut and do completely reset up a guitar or whatever that are really good. But like refret a guitar. I'm like, dude, I don't do that. I'm like, I just don't. And especially I don't really have the tools to do it on the road.
Yeah.
So, but you're as good as your Rolodex. If you've got a guy that can do it, and you're like, hey man, you ship it off to the dude, and I've got guys that I can call, and I can ship them a guitar, and they can turn it around in 24 hours.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's
I try to know a guy in every major city. You were out with Sheryl Crow last year.
Yep.
And you did some shows with Isbell, but Isbell's guy, Michael Betancourt, I'll shout him out right now.
Oh yeah, great dude.
I know that someone brought Jason a Les Paul one day. We were in Texas, and the Les Paul Forum guy, whatever, brought him a burst to play. And Jason was like, I don't like this about it. And he starts just tearing it apart, an hour before the show.
Right.
And I'm like, what are you doing, man?
Yeah.
I've got high anxiety watching him do that.
Right.
It's not even my guy.
Right.
So there's guys like that, like you said, I've seen people cut a nut, before the show.
Right.
And it's that freaks me out.
Yeah. I mean, I try not to do stuff like that, but if you have to, then you got to make it work. If your guy says, hey, I want to play this guitar tonight and it's unplayable.
Yeah.
You make it as playable as possible.
As you can. Yeah.
You do it, that's what that's our job. Our job is to make our guys feel comfortable and make the gig easy for them. People that don't know the business and stuff that, will ask, well, what is your job? And it's almost like,
oh, you're the guy that tunes.
Say, yeah. And that's, they'll say that, or I'll be like, or, I know guys that, that do our jobs that are like, I'm a guitar butler, I'm the guitar janitor or something. It's like, it's like, and, a lot of it has to do with, you're part kind of psychiatrist, if your guy has anxiety. Yeah. Or caddies. Yeah. Same thing. And you don't want to, like, one thing if something happened like during the day, like say an amp blew up or something, and I fixed it for the show, I may or may not tell my dude about it because I don't want him to have that in his brain. If right before the show, because like with Aerosmith, they don't sound check or anything. Yeah. So I only see him when he comes in, usually from the plane, an hour before the show.
Yeah.
But I don't want to rush in and go, hey, Brad, man, all your amps blew up today. And then that's the whole thing he's thinking about the whole show.
Yeah.
Just, you just don't do that. I mean, I don't try to hide anything from him. No. You just want to try to make it just as easy as possible. That's the
because a lot of people don't know, like you said, we are part psychiatrists. Like it'll get in their head, the smallest thing.
Right.
And then they think about it through the whole show, when it's really not a big deal.
Yeah.
But, the worst thing I can tell my guy is, hey, we're having some RF issues here.
Right.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And then they're going to hear it whether it's there or not. He starts on his
back foot, from song one.
Yeah. And they're going to hear it whether it's there or not.
Yeah. And so everything that goes wrong that night, even if he's clamming it up on his playing, he's going to blame the RF issues.
Exactly.
We're gonna move on. What made you start Three Monkeys? It started out as an amp company.
Yep. Yep. So I kind of wanted to do something. I kind of want to do something else. You know, I mean, like I love what we do, but being away from home, like, 6 to 8 months out of the year, sometimes longer.
Yeah.
The last Green Day tour I did was like 22 months straight with like, 2-week breaks here and there. And one of those was like 10 weeks in Europe, and it was that like, I mean, almost got a divorce over that one because that's a long time to be away. And my wife doesn't know me doing anything else. So I kind of just wanted to do something else. So I was like, I thought about, maybe starting a guitar company, building guitars or, but I've always been interested in like electronics and stuff. So I was like, man, maybe an amp company. I was maybe because it was all these boutique amps were starting out. And this is like 2006, 2007. And so I had a lot of friends that built amps, and I called Greg Germino from Germino Amps, and he's like, oh man, yeah, you should do it. I called Fred from Divided by 13. He's like, oh yeah, go ahead, man. I mean, these are people that would essentially be my competition, but they were very encouraging. And I had bought some amps from a company called Blockhead in New York. And so Ossie, who was the guy that basically was a one-man shop who ran that business, I called him and I was like, hey, what do you think? And he goes, man, you should do it. He goes, you know what? He goes, why don't we do it together? And I'm like, wait, really? I'm like, because I was going to start from scratch. I didn't really know much. I mean, I could do some amp repair, but didn't know a whole lot. And I'm like, hey, this guy knows everything.
Yeah.
So he's like, yeah, maybe we should do something together. So we started talking about it. And so Brad was moving houses up in the Massachusetts area. And it was right around the time Ozzy and I were talking. So Ozzy's like, well, I'm going to drive up, because he had driven up to, drop off some amps one time before. He goes, hey, I'll drive up and let's talk about this amp thing. And just happened to be the weekend we were moving stuff out of Brad's house. So he helped with that. And the bass, Tom Hamilton's bass tech at the time, Jerry Sabatino, helped out. And then Brad took us all to dinner that night. So we're sitting there at dinner, this Italian place. And Ozzy's like, hey, did you tell Brad what we're doing? And I was like, no, I hadn't said anything to him. And Brad's like, what are you talking about? I said, oh, Ozzy and I are going to start an amp company. And he goes, well, I went in on that. And I was like, really? He's like, yeah. So I'm like, okay. So basically that's how Three Monkeys started. And we started in 2007. And I told Brad, I was like, okay, the only way this can work is I got to quit. I can't tech for you anymore. I said, because you guys go out for at least 6 months a year. And he's like, I'm okay with that. I said, we'll find you a good dude. So then Ozzy moved down to North Carolina because he's like, well, it'd be cheaper down there to do it than up in New York. And I wasn't moving because of my wife and her business, and Ozzy was single. So he moved down, and we did like almost a year of R&D in my house, in my sunroom, basically, with moving blankets on the wall, to deaden the sound. And we launched our amp in October 2008, basically right when the whole economy crashed.
Yeah.
So it was like not a good time to launch a business, but yeah, we did all right. We did all right. We did it for 10 years, and then so basically in 2015. I was wiring up a pedal board for myself, which I hardly ever do, but I was, and I always like to make my own power cables. And basically I would just I had this shielded cable that I would just put these, little 9-volt 2.1 millimeter ends on for power cables, make them perfect length or whatever. And so I'm doing this, and I'm in my 50s, and I'm like, can't see, and I'm like, man, I hate soldering these little cables. Somebody should make these solderless. And then, so I have my computer right there. I'm like, I started Googling it, and I'm like, wow, nobody makes a solderless like DC connector. So I had always used George L like audio connectors because I like doing solderless on pedal boards because it was easy to cut the length, and I always did it with Brad's pedal boards and a couple other guys I toured with, and never any issues with the solderless. So I literally went out into my garage, which is my shop, and I cut a George L's 1/4-inch cable in half, took the 1/4 inch off of it, and then I cut the 2.1 millimeter off of the soldered little version, and I very crudely put them together, like soldered them together.
Yeah.
And then, put the George L cable to it, made 2 ends, and then plugged it in, and it worked. And I was like, wow. So I took a photo with it with my iPhone, and I sent it to Ossie, my partner, and he's like, what's that? I go, it's a solderless DC cable for a pedal board. He's like, wow, that's amazing. He's like, where did you get that? I go, I just made it. And he's like, so what happened was we started, decided we were going to market that.
Yeah.
And I went to a company that built like dual DC cables, and it took them literally 6 months to tell me they couldn't do it. So, and this is like 2015 going into 2016. And then, so then I'm like, well, maybe I should approach it from the different end. I'll find people that do a manufacturer that does solderless stuff,
yeah,
and see if they can adapt the audio side to this DC thing. So that's what we did. Eventually getting a patent on it, and launched that in late 2016, sometime in 2016. We got a patent and launched that, and it did really well. And so about a year later, we decided we have a certain way, like ours basically just screws onto the cable.
Yeah.
That's what we have a patent on, is the design of that. And so we started making 1/4-inch ones, and sold really well, and started doing basically better. And the amp market was just dead. So in 2018, we shut the amps down, and we've been just a cable company ever since. And thank God, because when the pandemic hit, I couldn't tour for 18 months.
Yeah.
So I had the Three Monkeys Solderless cable business to fall back on. It was doing really well because everybody's at home.
Everybody at home making pedal boards,
buying cables left and right.
Yeah.
So that's basically how that is. I mean, we every once in a while still build an amp, one-off amp or something. Brad's been using them pretty much off and on for the last, since 2008, since we built him his first one. So.
Yeah. Is he still using them on stage?
Well, right now we're actually using a Fractal. We're using an FM9 Fractal, which is, kind of the, whatever amp emulation. I mean, it emulates everything. It does all your effects. It does the amp, the cabinet, goes straight out, XLR to front of house. And, it sounds amazing. Like, especially in the in-ears, it sounds like you're playing this huge arena. Even if you're not, we're playing this theater, this residency in this theater. But he's still using. I'm actually using a couple of Three Monkeys amps on stage, just basically power amps, just to give a little bit of sound out of the Fractal. So there's a little bit of air movement on stage.
Feel it here,
yeah, and it would be, and then I have a divided by 13 amp that he's had forever. That is like the emergency, like super emergency backup. Like if he was to, and this hasn't happened, but if he was to, in the middle of a show, go, it just doesn't sound right, you know, then, I've got a pedal board out there with some pedals on it. He could just I could just switch him over to just going into the divided by 13. And it'd be a real amp. And, we're super happy with the Fractal. Knock on wood, it's been flawless.
Yeah.
And
I looked into the Fractal before this tour, and I actually went with the Line 6 HX stomp, which is similar.
Which I have. I actually own one of those for a while.
It's actually similar to a Fractal, but a lot easier for me.
Right.
Like I said, I'm the last one to the party, man.
Yeah, and I'm the same. I'm like, I was very against it being a tube amp guy.
Yeah.
I was like, but once we dialed up some sounds on it in rehearsals, we were like, wow.
Yeah.
It sounds like the real thing. And it reacts like the real thing. You can turn your volume down on your guitar, and it's still there, just like a real amp. And even Tom Hamilton's using one.
And I know there's guys out there that are traditionalists that'll tell you like, it doesn't sound like.
Yeah.
But the 50,000 people that showed up, there's probably about 10 out there that hear that.
Right. And there's nobody in the Aerosmith audience, including like, known rock stars that I know that come to the shows that are friends with Brad or friends with me that are, none of them go, hey man, what are you guys using, a fractal? Or what are you guys using, digital? Are you guys using digital? What's going on? I could hear it. None of them. They're all like, hey, what amp was he using? That sounded amazing.
Yeah.
And you're like, well,
it's a secret, man.
Yeah. There's a lot of cool ones out there. There's the Kemper and the Line 6, the Helix, and there's that Quad Cortex that I know some guys are using.
That thing is.
I mean, the Fractal's amazing. It's just a little too granular for me. Like, there's just too many settings on it. I wish it should have an easy button, where it's just like, just give me I like having the advanced settings, but it would be nice if that all could get hidden so that you're just like getting
an
just
intermediate.
Like say if there's like a phase 90, stomp box emulation, just give me the one knob because that's all it has. Whereas the line 6, you pull that up and there'll be 10 knobs to turn. And I'll be like, I don't know what to turn to make it sound like it's supposed to sound.
Hey man, what keeps you coming back? I know guys like we're always like, it's my last tour.
Yeah.
What keeps you coming back?
Man, I just love it. I mean, I've always loved being around gear. I like finding new gear. I like playing. I like to me, it's hard to explain to anybody that doesn't do this but like the roar of the crowd, like when the house lights go down, the roar of the crowd, the hair stands up on your arm, and it doesn't really even matter which band you're working for. It's like there's an energy, that's just indescribable.
Yeah.
And also, I pride myself on doing a good job, and I feel like I do my job well in this industry, no matter who I'm working for. And at the end of the day, I feel proud, I've done a great job, and I love it. The thing that I don't love is, being away from home all the time.
Yeah.
And, especially if you're out with some of these bands that only do a couple of shows a week, like Aerosmith, where we have a couple of days off in between. It's like some of those days off, you do stuff, in what various cities you're in, but some days it's just kind of like, in the middle of nowhere, there's nothing to do. And you're just like, man, I wish I was at home. I could be at home, in my shop building something or, fixing the car or whatever.
I get it. Or you have an artist who you're kind of always on call for.
Yeah.
You can never plan your life.
Right.
Because you never know what happens. Any plans for this year?
Yeah.
That you can talk about?
Yeah. This coming year, I'll probably be a big tour.
Yeah.
With whomever. Like you said, I worked for Sheryl Crow for pretty much all of 2022. Actually 2021 and 2022. August to August, I worked for her, taking care of Robert Kearns and, Peter Stroud and Tim Smith. Great gig. I love the band and crew. I've known, I tech for, two of the guys in Cry of Love are in Cheryl's band now. Yeah. And also, oddly, his wife, who was in DAG, is also in that band. So I've tech for all of them in other bands. I've tech for Sheryl, just filling in for her guy. Pretty much tech for everybody in the band but Fred. So it's like I got that gig, whenever I want or need it, if they need me. And we'll see what happens with Aerosmith for 2023. So, I guess I said I wouldn't be pushing a road case at 50, and I'm closing in on 60 now. So maybe I'll make it 60 as the cutoff date.
At 60, you'll be like, give it 5 more years.
Yeah.
During the pandemic, I try not to talk about the pandemic a lot, but it's something that happened. Man, a lot of people left the business we're getting a lot of new blood in this industry. What would you tell somebody? Like, what advice would you give somebody wanting to be a tech, backline tech, and specifically?
Just, man, keep your eyes and ears open, and learn from the dudes that have been doing it forever. And learn from the dudes that are new, they may know some stuff. But that's what I always tell people, because always ask me, well, how'd you get into this business? How and I always say it was the hardest business to get into. It's even harder to get out of.
Yeah. It's like the mafia.
It is. It's like every time I get out, they pull me back in.
I know, you leave and you're like, yeah, that's it. And then your phone rings. You're like, how much?
Yeah.
Yes.
I have a buddy that is a photographer, and he's always like, you suck at retirement, because I've retired, 2 or 3 times, And I thought about retiring during the pandemic. I was out of work for 18 months, and I did a lot of other stuff. I have my cable business, but I do a lot of woodworking and build furniture and do stuff. And it was kind of like, well, maybe I can make this my job. But, I'll tell you what I don't want to do is go do some 9-to-5, sit in a cubicle job. It's just not for me.
Yeah. And I always say, man, that's more power to people who can do that. But yeah, I can't see myself going back to that.
No. And I did it, when I was probably in my 20s. I did it.
We all did stupid shit when we were young. Anything, Three Monkeys Solderless coming up? Any new products? Are you get excited about?
We just released solderless RCAs. So they're gold RCAs with the same technology that for the connector onto the cable, and we actually have a triaxle cable that's double shielded. So we aimed the RCAs at, basically, people, home studios and people with home stereos, but also we aimed it at the car audio market, because a lot of people that are doing, like, especially these big, 14 power amps in a car audio thing, and subwoofers and this, that, all of those connections are RCA. So we've been pitching those at a lot of these install places, and like, hey, you don't have to buy this off the shelf 20-foot cable when you need to go 5 feet.
Yeah.
You can cut this to length. So that's the newest thing we've come up with. Just looking to get some traction in car audio for that. Quarter inch is still doing well, and so is the DC.
Yeah. Yeah. I love mine. I love my Three Monkeys stuff. Yeah. All right, man. Where can they find you online?
3monkeyssolderless.com, basically. And on, Instagram and all that other stuff. 3 Monkeys Solderless.
Right on. Well, I don't know if you know what question's next.
Oh, I do.
If breakfast was included, what would you have?
Coffee.
Coffee.
Because I'm not a big breakfast guy. I'm not an egg guy and stuff. And I was always the kid that really never ate breakfast, or I'd throw up at the bus stop, before I went to school. So, coffee.
Folgers?
I love coffee. I like a nice latte, but for because I'm here, I kind of have an apartment here in Vegas, and we're doing this residency. Cafe Bustelo that you get at the Hispanic store.
Okay,
it's like a great espresso grind that is cheap and tastes great.
Right on, man.
So
there you go. You've heard it from the coffee connoisseur here. All right, man. Well, thanks for taking the time.
Thank you, Bernie.
I know I've asked you a lot to do this, and I was here.
Yeah,
I was here.
It's awesome.
I brought the bad luck, and the show was canceled.
Yeah, unfortunately, another show canceled because the singer's sick.
But we got to do this.
Yeah.
All right,
got to hang out. Cool.
Thanks a lot, brother.
Thanks, man.
Right on, Greg Howard. You can find information about Three Monkeys Solderless at Three Monkeys Solderless on Instagram and online. Check it out, especially if you're a guitar player, man. I'm not going to badmouth George L stuff. That's some really good products, but I've been using the Three Monkeys stuff for a little over 3 years, and I love it. That's a little plug for Greg. All right, guys, I am done. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next week.